Hey everyone. So I have a couple of projects that I'm working on for my YouTube channel, and this one is not related to the other two I've been working on. This is not about the Himalayas. This is not about meditation. This is my Pagan Witch movie review update. For the past 6 years or so, I made a kind of challenge for myself to watch a whole bunch of movies from around the world and review them from a pagan perspective, because I noticed that movies that are reviewed are usually reviewed either from a Christian or secular perspective. And and I noticed that pagans in particular, when they are looking for something spooky to watch on Halloween, they usually watch The Craft, which is 25 years old or so, um, which is kind of, or The Wicker Man. So that's like two pagan movies that made it really big. And I was like, in all this time, nothing else has come out, like with the whole New Age movement and goddess spirituality and kind of I don't know. I thought, and also the fact that scriptwriters or um, movie companies, production houses, are very often heard to be saying all the best scripts have been written, um, or every script has been written. I think they've even gone so far as to claim that. And meanwhile, they don't really vary the themes of scripts very often. Like it seems like even the indie movies are following the model of Hollywood, and very often every independent movie is a homage to something that has been very successful in the horror genre. Especially, they do a lot of re, what really ought to be called remakes of The Exorcist, and because that was very influential. And there's so many classics like The Shining and um, Halloween movies, which I kind of, for me, I realize like the Halloween series are a classic, but for me, it's kind of frustrating that they're so popular because it doesn't have that much to do with Halloween. Like, it's a slasher movie, really. Like in terms of the mystical and spiritual import of Samhain, it's not that related. Is it Jason? I can't remember which one is Mike Myers and which one is Jason. But anyway, um, so yeah, so during the last 6 years, I have watched so many movies. I have watched movies. I have watched a whole lot of Nigerian cinema, because one of the things that I thought, oh, that this, when you're researching this, you're looking for search terms that are going to find you something that is relevant for paganism, and the first thing I did was pagan movie. Um, but very quickly, it became obvious that there is a lot of sort of confusion in the mainstream about what a pagan is, and and you know, producers think nothing of conflating paganism with Satanism, which in my book is really Christianity. I mean, I think of Satanism as a Christian thing because Satan didn't really exist outside of the Christian worldview, um, either before it or even since in traditions that didn't have the Judeo-Christian God or Jesus. Satan was not really a part of it, and evil was a little bit more of a fluid concept. I think that evil in Christianity and Islam and Judaism is it's a very specific thing that is, they talk about pure evil and these things, and it's supposed to be very dramatic. I find it kind of boring, actually, because it's very one-dimensional. It's just like an entity that has no other purpose than to cause harm. And it's interesting because you'd think that that would produce in me like, oh my god, like this fear, but this sort of dramatic chill. But it actually doesn't. It's sort of predictable. I actually would find the idea of something like a Celtic fairy, sorry, um, a lot more unsettling because it's so unpredictable. Like fairies are so not evil or good; they're just completely what they are. They're sort of wild. Anyway, so what am I saying? Yes, after all of that time. Well, okay, so I wanted to talk about, what I discovered using different search terms. So the word priestess produces a lot of Nigerian movies. You would think that, like I kind of came to paganism through the myths of Babylon, so then the word priestess became associated with paganism in my mind. And I think it's fair to say that there aren't really Judeo-Christian or Islamic priestesses. And consequently, it's okay to say that priestesses are pretty much more of a theme of paganism, if we're going to use that umbrella term, which, for the purposes of my project, I am. Such a ramble already, and I'm not even started. Anyway, so yes, Nigerian movies are interesting because there are a lot of them, and if you search the word priestess on YouTube, you will find legions upon legions of movies from Nollywood. So usually Nollywood is kind of a Christian worldview. So when they're talking about priestesses, it's not usually in a positive way. It's usually kind of like antagonistic, but it's still interesting because it's a depiction of priestesses, and we don't really have them in cinema otherwise, unless you're counting like a Game of Thrones. And so I got some stuff out of watching that, but it's interesting. Like there's really nothing from Hollywood or from the UK. You might expect the UK to produce something like, I don't know, like Ireland, Wales, Scotland, especially Cornwall, to produce something about a priestess, like one movie in 20 years. I realized that, like, Robert Graves, when he wrote The White Goddess, he had this whole idea about a matriarchy, like a global spanning matriarchy at some time, which was then, I think even in his own time, it was debunked. But it was not debunked. They just said it's debunked. They didn't really say like why it was debunked or what was wrong with his research or why it was believed in the first place, because a lot of people kind of ran with it. Well, maybe they just wanted to because the idea of a matriarchy is kind of nice. Anyway, so the word druid, if you search for it, produces, I think, 3 movies. Like, the word druid is the most maltreated word in a pagan context of any other word that I've come across. And you will find, I think, 3 movies. There's the Christopher Lambert movie, The Druids, which is a terrible movie, in my opinion. From a druidic perspective, it's really, really boring and not giving any kind of insight into the practices and beliefs of the Druids. It's really a historical account of the invasion of Gaul by Caesar, and interestingly, the only character who performs any kind of magic or ritual in the whole film is Caesar himself. So you don't. The Druids are just kind of shown as these political adversaries in it, and and then there's some kind of sci-fi, the Garm Wars or something like that, which I've not seen, and then there's the Eternal, which I just saw recently, which is a story about someone discovering a bog druid. So you have these bog men who are like um, Stone Age or Bronze Age people who are found in bogs, perfectly preserved in Ireland usually. And in this particular case, it was supposed to be a druid that was found, and then someone got possessed. Anyway, it was kind of, I guess, from a druidic perspective, it was more interesting than the usual depictions of paganism, but it was somehow completely lost me. Like it didn't have any, it didn't bring me into the story. And very often, whenever you have a movie where there is any kind of depiction of a witch or a druid, usually a witch, but in this case a druid, it's almost like the character is not any more complex than the shark in Jaws. Like it's just a monster. So, so that's a little boring. So I would say, I'm going to proclaim this. I would say that there is, in fact, something like a Hays Code in effect in regards to paganism. In this regard, in the way that there are really no movies featuring. So the other search term you might try is the word goddess, because um, there, paganism is obviously associated with polytheism and goddess worship, and and I think when Gerald Gardner, I think although he was himself a little bit of a misogynist, but he established Wicca, there was a lot of feminists, spiritual feminists, who jumped on board, and Wicca somehow became associated with this idea of feminine spirituality, which is funny because it's actually not that feminist unless we're talking about one of the denominations of Wicca, like Dianic Wicca. Anyway, so yes, I the word goddess. There are no movies, none, except in Nollywood. There is, I think, a Australian movie which is a musical where they use the word goddess, and the funny thing is that the word goddess has come to be conflated with this idea of like a really sexy, attractive woman. So much so that I think there was a movie about ISIS called ISIS Returns or something like that, and I mean the lady that they got to play ISIS was someone you might see in like the Chasing series, Chasing Atlanta or Chasing Orlando or something like that. She was like the sexuality was very modern and very overblown. Um, anyway, so the Hays Code, yes, I think it's a Hays Code because words like goddess and druid are kind of almost blacklisted, and the word witch, you will find a lot of movies if you search the word witch, but it is very much exclusively associated with Satanism, and which is kind of, I think, not representative. I haven't done like kind of a statistical analysis of how many people who identify as witch are Satanists, but as opposed to pagans or goddess worshippers. But I would kind of estimate that there are more who are goddess worshippers, certainly based on like documentaries and stuff like that. So, and I have been asked like, why aren't you doing documentaries? And I have done a few, and they are better. But the thing about documentaries is that the purpose of my research is actually to analyze what is going into the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is more accessed, it's more targeted by horror movies and fantasy movies than it is by documentaries, which are designed for the conscious mind, the analytical mind. So, so I'm kind of interested in what is being hammered into people's heads when they're not really thinking, when they're just watching a movie like junk food. Um, because I think that those things become a sort of tool of education as much as things that target the conscious mind. And so, yes, so it's a giant flaw, basically. My research is a failure because I now understand why people are watching The Craft and The Wicker Man, because there isn't much else. I saw a movie called Seeds. The most success, the most success I had with any search term was actually the term folk horror, which it took me a long time to get to. You see, I'm always like using my own brain instead of adapting to what the mainstream terminology is, and folk horror is what the mainstream calls my area of interest. Um, and so I came across a movie searching that way called Seeds, which is a very good movie. A little bit grisly, honestly. Like I could do with a lot less gore. This is my problem with Ari Aster too. It's like so much gore, but it's a good movie. And I also I liked that the main character was Irish, and I liked that they had goddesses in it, and I liked that you know very thin on the ground in cinema, and I liked that. I kind of liked the point that they were making. Like they were showing paganism in a positive way, in a very feminist way, which I think if you have pagan friends, you might be sick of them banging on about the feminine goddess and priestesses and witches and the moon and all this stuff, but you have to realize there's no representation to speak of in cinema. Um, so your friends might be kind of trying to fill in the gap with their own talking. Um, and what else did I want to say about it? Obviously, there is a lot more representation when you get outside of Hollywood. So Europe, but it's not as much as I would like, honestly. I would expect more of a discrepancy between Hollywood and the rest of the world than there is. But it seems like quite a lot of indie cinema is seeking to emulate Hollywood, as if there's something that they have found something iconic and emblematic that must be copied. And I really think those things should only be copied on merit, not just on popularity. Um, I realize, it's an industry, so people are trying to make money as well. So that's probably why that happens. And and then the other search term, which is popular in some regards, but is really only traditionally found in pagan contexts, is the word fairy. And now, people from Ireland are going to get mad at me because, it's not fairy. It's fairy is the Old English word for the place where they come from. And the Fae were called the Tuatha, or I think that's the pronunciation. Tuatha. It's it looks like Tuatha De Danann, but it's pronounced Tuatha. In Gaelic, someone should tell me. I don't know if it's offensive to say Gaelic. I noticed that Irish people say the Irish language, and when I was a kid, my mom always said Gaelic. But I think that Gaelic is a little bit too flexible a term, because in Scotland they have Gaelic, and I think then they differentiate. Like in Wales, it's Welsh, and in Ireland, it's the Irish language. They're all a little bit related, but I mean, Welsh is quite different, to be honest. But but yeah, I don't hear anyone saying Gaelic anymore, and I'm not sure if it's if it's been blacklisted, um, like so many things. Anyway, um, yeah. So the term fairy is it produces a lot of kids movies, understandably. And I was thinking about the fact that like when you have paranormal investigation movies, which is a lot, there are tons and tons and tons of them. We're remaking Paranormal Activity every day, and um, and when something goes bump in the night, they go through a list of what it could be, and it could be a demon or a ghost, pretty much. And I'm like, nobody ever wonders if it's a fairy. Like, I don't know, because first of all, like Christianity is just 2,000 years, so it's not that long in the history of humanity. And also, people were believing in fairies up until 1700s, I think, at least in England. In the rural areas, and there are native tribes, notably the Ojibwa or the Anishinaabe, who believed in fairies or some kind of small prankish being. And so I don't see why one's mind doesn't go there, apart from the fact that they're not that prevalent in Hollywood movies. Um, but I remember watching Eddie Lanahan, who was talking about the fairies, and they produce effects in a household very similar to what a poltergeist would do, especially if you've got a hawthorn tree um, in a direct line from your doorway. That means that there might be a pathway which are marked by hawthorn trees for fairies to travel the land. So if your house is in the way, they're going to run through and they're going to cause all kinds of havoc. Um, anyway, watch Eddie Lanahan if you want to know about fairies, because he has a lot of research and he tells a great story. Um, so yeah, fairies also kind of blacklisted. Look, I mean, America is different, but it's not. The colonizers were not really huge fairy believers usually, but some of them, there was a lot of Irish who came over, and a lot of English, and then also the native people had their own beliefs of something that was similar. Now, I mean, I think the Wendigo is, at least superficially, somewhat evocative of the horned god, Kernanos, or, I think Lu is also a horned god. Anyway, such a tangent. So, yes, the Hays Code is in effect, and then also, I think that I shouldn't make it too political about, for instance, the fairies. One reason why they might not be featured in horror movies is the fact that most people think of fairies as a kids thing, because it's sort of associated with Disney and kiddie films. But I don't know. Yeah, I've seen one children's movie about fairies that was okay, but it wasn't amazing. The Snow White and the Huntsman did okay, I think, with fairies. They had the white stag and everything, which was pagan relevant at least, because that would be a sort of main deity in the pagan tradition, especially the Celtic pagan tradition. I say Celtic because I'm weird. My mother said it, and I like soft C. Yes, so I think that this project is ongoing, and I will continue to review them. But I forgive anyone who is still watching The Craft on Halloween. And I have, Pagan Witch Movie Review is a page on Facebook, which, if you want to see some recommendations, they're there. I think Seeds is definitely a must-see. and there are. If I give 7 moons to a movie, it means that it's worth watching. Um, but not in a way that you would expect. Like one of the funny things that happened recently was I reviewed a whole series of movies that I thought were very inspiring from a pagan perspective, and they were featuring a lot of female characters, which is actually surprisingly unusual in horror movies, unless it's the girl, like the last girl character who has to kind of survive after screaming and running a lot. But it's not usual to have female characters with personalities and agency and ingenuity. But these movies all had that, like usually as many as 7, and they didn't all have to die, and and they were very diverse and interesting characters, and also kind of looking to my eye like sort of Apollonian priestesses, even though it was set in modern day. And the production house that makes them is called Shady Dawn, and they the main producer, I guess he is Christian. He told me after I reviewed his movies, he was like, "I'm actually Christian," and and that was kind of humbling in a way, because I realized that I think that this Hays Code that's in effect is not so much an effect of a Christian prejudice as it is a marketing strategy. They're just dumbing things down as much as possible in order to reach a wider audience, and I don't think that it's like a Christian conspiracy per se. I mean, obviously, this was like one person who I met through, so it's not even representing the majority of Christian filmmakers necessarily. But it was funny and humbling, and also I think that the guy making those films has true faith in what he believes in, because he showed a lot of sensitivity in everything that he did in his films. And so yeah, Shady Dawn is good. And they talk about pagan things, yes, in an adversarial way, but not insulting. It's not like, they're all the same. Satan, goddess, whatever. It's not like that. So, do I have any kind of final remarks about this? Not really. Oh, the only thing about Nigerian movies is you should make a distinction in your mind between Nollywood, which is predominantly Christian narrative, and Yoruba cinema, which would normally have films in the Yoruba language. If you're lucky, you'll get some with subtitles, and they will be more sympathetic to Yoruba beliefs. And they're incredibly different from Nollywood. Like, very poetic, very druidic, in this kind of like using poems and parables and symbols as a way of teaching, which is very different from Nollywood, which seems kind of, I don't know, a little bit hysterical. It's always Nollywood is like melodramatic, and it reminds me a bit of Bollywood in the way that people repeat what they're saying a lot for emphasis, and there's a lot of shouting, and I often have to turn the volume up and down in order to deal with the way they've done the sound, which seems like huge discrepancy between when they're talking quietly and when they're talking loudly. And but yes, Nigerian cinema is very, very different, very subtle, and very funny as well. Like, they have an amazing subtle sense of humor. So so I would recommend Nigerian cinema. And there's anything else I wanted to say? Oh yes, obviously the series Cliodhna of Gleann, The Witch of Gleann, is a series made by, I think, Germans who live in Finland, and the spirituality that they're covering. So this is like what some people might call cultural appropriation, but necessary in this case because no Irish people are making anything on this. It is a community of people living in the forests of Finland and worshipping Celtic or Celtic deities and following the wheel of the year, which is like the pagan witch calendar. And so it's sort of like druid centric, but it's the best thing I've found in terms of pagan content, I think. I would go so far as to say that it might dethrone the Mists of Avalon. Maybe not for costumes, but definitely like the mysticism is very palpable in it. Okay, yeah. I mean, my project didn't turn out the way I wanted, but I have found a lot of movies that were kind of diamonds in the rough that I can't remember at the moment. So obviously they weren't that notable. Oh my god, the cats. Um, he has something he wants to say as well. Anyway, lots of love to you all. That's all I'm going to say for now. I will keep you updated about Pagan Witch movie review, and check out the page if you want to see some movies about paganism. All right, bye.